In this video, I'm going to be discussing a slightly more advanced topic, which includes a fair amount of detail. I'll be starting with the presentation we used in the Keypoint Basics tutorial, and I'll also be expanding on a topic that I introduced in the team competition video. Both of those videos relied upon Keypoint's ability to build an anonymous roster on the fly. Don't worry if that sounded like gibberish, because you'll be an expert by the end of this video. Let's get started. Keypoint associates keypads with people in what we call the roster. You can view and edit it by clicking on the View Roster button. The Add button is one way to add a participant to that roster. Some of these fields may look a little different based upon your licensing and whether you're using physical keypads, virtual keypads, or even both at the same time. The transceiver field is grayed out on mine because I only have one transceiver set up. If I had multiple transceivers going for a large event or a hybrid meeting, this dropdown would be active and I would need to specify which transceiver this participant's keypad belonged to. The keypad number field may be labeled Participant ID if you're requiring participants to log in with a predefined ID. Otherwise, this number corresponds to the pad number, or what we label as the address on the back of the keypad. First and last name are obviously the name of the participant who will be using the keypad. The voting weight field is used for things like shareholder meetings, where a participant may be voting for more than a single share. The default is 1 because each person normally counts as one vote. The roster is also one of the places where you can assign a participant to a team. In the team competition tutorial, I set up 3 teams, red, green, and blue. In that video, participants assigned themselves on the fly, but if I wanted to manually assign specific participants to specific teams, this is one place I can do that. We haven't discussed the concept of participant groups yet, so I'll leave that for another video. Just know that you can manually assign participants to various groups here in the roster as well. Finally, the 2 Add buttons. Add and Clear will add this participant and reset the form so you can create another. Pro tip, you can use the Tab button to cycle through all the fields and then hit Control and Enter at the same time to perform an Add and Clear. That way you don't need to move your hands away from your keyboard. Add and Close adds the participant and closes the form. The Enter key alone, without Control, will also add and close the form. Notice these little letter buttons corresponding to the last names in the roster. That can be useful for locating individuals within a large roster. There's also a grid view that feels more like a spreadsheet if you prefer that. Okay, so that's the basics of building a roster. A roster is necessary if you need to display real names on the screen for top keypad competitions, or if you have the need to create reports or grades based on specific individual performance. But pre-programming the roster is just one way of building it. We didn't even have a roster in the earlier tutorials. Let's take a look and see what Keypoint was doing under those circumstances. I'm going to click the Clear Roster button to erase the 2 participants that I just added and go back to a completely empty roster. Now, I'll jump into the slideshow and pull the question slide. See how the participant counter is showing 0 out of 0? That means that nobody has responded, and also that there's nobody in the roster. Watch what happens when I vote with a keypad. It changed to 1 of 1. I'm going to vote with a few more keypads, and then we'll take a look at the result. Okay, it looks like we've got some data, so let's exit the slideshow and take a look at the roster. Notice that Keypoint added my keypads to the roster on the fly. Everyone's first name is the word keypad, and everyone's last name matches their keypad number. This means that Keypoint is automatically tracking individual voters even though I never told it how many to expect or who would be using each keypad. This also means that if I passed around a sign-in sheet, I could go in after the fact and change their names before I created my reports. If you're with me so far, you're doing great. I'm going to clear this roster again though, and show you how to use an Excel sheet to build a roster. I have this sample roster here, which just has columns for the keypad number, participant name, and the team. Over in Keypoint, we can import that roster from the submenu under the View Roster button. Choose the file, and then Keypoint wants to know whether or not the first row contains column headings. In this example, it did not. So we have to go through and define what information each column holds. That's it. If we look at the roster after we import it, we can see our 2 participants. I'm going to clear the roster one more time and show off another pro tip. I have another roster here in Excel that does have those labels in the first row, and it also has 2 fields that aren't part of Keypoint at all. Imagine a scenario where you're conducting compliance training and you need the reports to contain an employee ID and whether the employee is hourly or salaried. We can add those columns here in Excel and then import them as custom fields for Keypoint to use in the reports. Here's what that looks like. This time, because I did have column headings, Keypoint pre-selected the data types and chose custom field for the two columns it didn't understand. If I import this and then go look at my roster, we can see that Keypoint added those two fields as if they were there all along. Okay, last time, I promise. I'm going to clear the roster one more time to show you a quick way to pre-build anonymous teams. This goes back to the team competition video, but the idea here is that I don't care who will be using each keypad, and I plan on putting little colored dots on them and arranging my room so that each team is seated together as I set out the keypads before participants arrive. So let's pretend I have an audience of up to 30 people coming, and I want to sort them into 3 teams of 10. I can click on the Batch Add button to add a generic group of keypads 1 through 30. Then, over in the Configure Teams interface, I can use the Participant buttons to associate keypads with each team. Here's my last pro tip for this video. You can click on the first keypad and hold the Shift key while you click on the last keypad to select a range of participants. Then use the Check Selected button to put ticks in the boxes of all the keypads you've selected. This makes it fairly quick to create anonymous teams. That same tip works in participant groups too, but that's a topic for another video. I know this video covered a lot of information. Thank you for hanging in there with me. There's a lot of flexibility in the rostering system, which makes it complex to explain, even though it's not really all that hard to use. I hope everything made sense, and as always, let us know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out the other tutorials in this series.